Well, welcome today. We kind of improvised this afternoon, the introduction, but my name is Tom Macias. I am the 2018-2019 Chair of Migration Studies here at IMéRA. And this is the second in our cycle of immigration conferences. The first one was back in January. We considered kind of the broader question of risk. The experience of risk that migrants come, both all along the path of deciding whether or not you're going to leave, the passage, and then once you arrive in a new country. We talked about last time the connection of risk to the migrant experience. This time around, we're looking at kind of a different scale at this topic, psychotherapy in particular, the mental health of migrants. Which is really key. This is kind of much more at the individual level than we were talking about last time. But we're very, very fortunate today to have two speakers to talk on this subject. So Silvia Torresin is here from Italy, and she will start off, and she will be talking about her work, her professional work as a psychotherapist with migrants and refugees in Italy, so really kind of in the field, on the ground experience of what people are going through. And after that, Beatrice Messini, she will be speaking to us as well about the experience in the field of refugees, migrants, but also specifically, as I understand, the tools, methodological tools that we can use to kind of get a better understanding of this experience. So it should be two presentations that very much complement each other, and we'll, what did we agree on time? For?
30 minutes.
Okay.
It could be 30, 40.
Okay. So the presentation, and there should be a lot of room for discussion about how these two presentations relate to each other. I do want to make a small plug. Wait, there's the book plug? Do we do the book plug?
Well, she will talk about
she'll do the book plug. Okay.
I have a book to say today.
Okay. But before, there is a third conference coming up in May 20th. That will be here at IMéRA. And there the topic will be climate and migration, climate change and migration. I just want to kind of put that out there. And we'll have some more publicity of that coming out soon. So that'll be the third conference in the series. But without any further ado, let them work this out.
So who will talk first?
Sylvia agreed. Or yeah, we're good? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Silvia Torresin, and I'm a psychotherapist in Italy, where I work as a freelance with asylum seekers and refugees hosted in the national reception system. The spirit of my talk today would be to share with you some considerations about the psychological support to refugees in Italy. First of all, I will share some general consideration on how I work in the technically precise frame proposed by branches of knowledge that have elaborated particular models. And secondly, I will try to give some indications of the phenomena, of how it has been treated till now by the reception asylum system, and I will say something about some general changes that happened recently in Italy connected to the change of politics. These changes have consequences also on the possibilities for people to be treated psychologically during their stay. And in the end, I will describe some moments and problems of my activity that are sensible to the political and social changes in act. So first of all, some considerations about ethnopsychiatry, which is my model of work and which is also a branch of knowledge that cross two different branches, the one of psychology from one end and the other of anthropology. In this field, it has been considered that psychological care and therapy is a method to understand someone who doesn't necessarily has our cultural references. This fact, in a transcultural context like the one of therapy, where therapists and patients have different cultural references, leads to another point, that we have to confront ourselves with different ideas of sicknesses and therapies. To have effect, the psychological cares have to start by a process of identification of the disorder that can be at least shared with the patient. For this reason, the model of therapy of ethnopsychiatry proposes a multicultural therapeutic group in which the most important figures come to be the so-called intercultural mediators, even more than translators. So they speak the language of the patient, but moreover, they are supposed to help in the therapeutic process to negotiate between therapist and patient, and between the professional theory of the care that the therapist has and the often implicit cultural theory of the care that the patient has. The aim of the multicultural therapeutic group is to negotiate with the patient the name of his disorder through a particular process, firstly, later to reconnect the person to his ethnological belongings, those of the family members from a side, but also others from the geopolitics on the other hand, reaffirming the patient to a historic reality from whom he can feel often expelled through trauma and through the travel, often dangerous, that he had. So what I thought to do now is to move to the Italian situation nowadays, give some numbers, some idea of the phenomena. We could say that while in Italy often we hear talking about an invasion of migrants, an invasion of refugees, and this legend can be somehow amplified by the fact that Lampedusa in Sicily is one of the first docks for migrants coming from the course of the central Mediterranean, it looks like the numbers of refugees is not so high compared to other European countries. According to data of the UNHCR, until the summer of the past year, the arrivals were lower than before. At the 29th of April of this year, the data reported in the site of Interior Ministry, just to know, it's the ministry led by Matteo Salvini, who is at the same time Interior Ministry and Vice Prime Minister of Italy. So according to this data, the arrivals at the Italian coasts from the beginning of the year were 722. And between these, 117 minors of 18 years old, compared to the 9,400 of the past year and the 37,000 of the year before. This is also probably due to the attacks of the government, to the work of the NGOs that in the last year tried to cover the lack of European politics on the safe in the Mediterranean Sea. Mainly the nationalities declared that at the moment of their arrival are Tunisia, Algeria, Iraq, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Guinea, Senegal, Somalia, Iran, Turkey, between others. So according to the data of the Interior Ministry, at the beginning of the former year, the asylum seekers and refugees hosted in reception facilities were 183,000, 136,000 at the end of the same year. It would be long to explain differences between type of reception, but what we can say is that the main politics on supporting refugees in Italy is to intervene in the first period between the registration of the asylum application and shortly after that they have obtained the documents. There is no support over this time. According to Italian law, there is no formal time frame for making an asylum application. The intention to make an asylum application can be in any moment expressed also orally. Asylum seekers should make their application as soon as possible. according to immigration legislation, a deadline of 8 days from arrival in Italy for migrants to present themselves to the authorities. They have to pass an interview at a territorial commission within 30 days after having received the application, and the commission decides in 3 days after. According to experience, due to the large number of simultaneous applications, the 30-day time limit is rarely respected in practice. And the asylum seeker is never informed about the authorities exceeding of the deadline. In Italy, the protection status are essentially 3 types. Asylum status, giving stable protection. Subsidiary status, giving a protection for 3 years, for example, in case of war in the country of origin. Plus a status not admitted internationally but given by the national law, which is called humanitarian status, giving protections for 2 years. Among other elements, humanitarian protection under national law is currently granted on grounds such as health, pregnancy, minor age, prolonged stay in Libya, meaning on the vulnerability of the person. So in the past year, on the total of applicants for refugee in Italy, the refugee who obtained a status of asylum were the 7%. The ones who obtained the subsidiary protection were the 5%, while the humanitarian status was of 21%. So the major part is the status accorded by the national law and not by the international law. In Italy, even if statistics on the average duration of the procedure in the past year are not available, we know that the complete procedure for the documents can last to 6 or 12 months, if not even more. Concerning the health assistance in general, and the psychological assistance in particular, the asylum seeker or refugee in state of need has the right to be treated while he is hosted in a reception facility. After that time, meaning maximum 6 months later, the reception of the documents, 6 months later the reception of the documents, there's no more payment for the cares, and the continuation is completely delivered to volunteers, not to professionals. The legislative reform that we had in November of the past year, the so-called Salvini Decree, or Safety Decree, has introduced several significant changes to the asylum procedure that limit further the health assistance. So drastic changes were brought with this decree to the design of the Italian reception system, which had articulated the reception for asylum seekers in phases. Phase of first aid and assistance, a first reception phase in governmental centers, and a second line reception phase. So the legislative reform has introduced several changes. Among other elements, it has codified for the first time in Italy the concept of internal protection. In addition, which is a very big change, the humanitarian protection status, frequently granted before the past year, had been abolished, completely abolished. I remember it was a total of 21%, so the large majority on the people obtaining a status. This will have, in a short time, particular effects for all the people who had to renew the status after 2 years and won't have the possibility to do it anymore, because you can't change this status with another status. The reform transformed the second line reception system. The law now draws a clear division between the reception system of asylum seekers, for a hand, and refugees on the other hand. the two reception systems are not longer communicated, and they become, in all respects, two parallel systems. Local authorities can accommodate in the system for refugees, so refugee, unaccompanied minors, victims of trafficking, domestic violence, and particular exploitation, and persons issued a residence permit for medical treatment due to a natural calamity in the country of origin or for acts of particular civic value. The reception system for asylum seeker is different. First aid and assistance operations continue to take place in the centers set up in the principal places of disembarkation. First reception is implemented in existing collective centers called temporary structures established by prefectures and subject to an assessment of the applicant's health condition and potential special needs. So the new reception system for asylum seekers promotes reception in large centers, like going from 300 to 800 people in the same place, and renders reception in small-scale facilities and apartments economically not sustainable. These ultimately represent an attack on those organizations that have pursued the path of integrated and decentralized reception. So the reform premised on a logic of security and control, no longer a logic of protection. Whereas the declared purpose of the reform was to reserve resources for the integration of those who will benefit of international protection, the new system ends up allocating time, energy, and public funds to organizing basic assistance for asylum seekers, contrary to a logic of protection and considerably slowing down the process of regaining self-sufficiently. The funds committed to psychological health will probably be reduced as effect of all this. Till now, there was a general mandate of the public psychiatric health services to the national reception system for the treatment of refugees. Now the challenge will be to understand how the government will face the needs of refugees, the critics of professionals and volunteers, the monitoring of European agencies, and how we'll program new lines of interventions. So I want to consider now how it is self-evident that from my point of view, let's say from the point of view of the psychological support to refugees, we have to consider some social factors that risk to influence in the negative sense the general health and psychological conditions of refugees, such as the long period of wait, the condition of reception, that can vary very much from a point of the country to another, and that has negative example, even if there are also virtuous example too. These factors add up with others of the well-known process of traumatization through the long and dangerous trip of which many refugees suffer. And probably force us to work more in group methods therapy with facilitators that can help us, even in a short time, to act in network of services and in network of therapists who can support the person. To have such group models as reference helps also who take care of refugees, because the increasing of social violence risks to affect everyone, the refugees first of all, and everyone who connects with them. The social ground that should give roots to services for mental health and health in general is becoming so more fragile and risks to make also services of psychologists, psychiatric, and everyone else less efficient. So also the services dedicated to the care and their workers can feel lonely. Beyond the refugee, who risk to be lonely anyway, in any case. Every day we are reached by news or absorbed in comments that refer to humanity escaping from wars to the search of a best life. And this fact proposes continuously the matter of the relationship between a so-called us and a so-called them. Autochthonous against foreigners, in peace against in war, savers against saved, influencing our social unconscious in the end. Psychotherapy offers one among other possibilities to meet directly one person of this group. So it potentially makes us near people that come from a world very distant from us. As a psychologist within project of reception, it became very early obvious to me the need to help people to elaborate psychically the migratory transit, beyond the need of immediate cares after their travels and in the first phase of their reception. The project of reception underestimates, in my opinion, from my point of view, this need. It is considered that the psychological health by itself it is important but not urgent, since there aren't serious symptoms of pathology. And it is neglected the evidence that, if thought at the correct time, the psychic rework of the feelings of the transit could help people to be better more quickly and more effectively. It is not an easy job to think about the feelings of the migratory transit. A typical tension is often present in the refugee, in the experience of the migration, among the desire to belong to a new place, unknown with its logic, and the need not to be eradicated by the place where the roots are. The result of this tension is often given by the feeling of not to be seen for what is really, indeed, authentically. If the native context is lost, it can be more fragile and need particular mechanism of defense. Georges Devereux, eclectic author of Ethnopsychoanalysis, wrote in 1964 a very interesting text on the necessity for the migrant to protect himself against annihilation. To these dynamics is added the effect of traumas, of the pains and the faced dangers, of the crossed anguish, but in general it always happened to the migrant to live in a space, real and psychological, restless, among need of recognition and lives of invisibility. Invisibility is a resistance that holds the relationship at a superficial level. It doesn't allow to go in the specific of one's identity and of the affiliation of each. It adapts us superficially, not to arouse suspects, leaving the person often with the feeling of not being considered as an individual, as if it was necessary to conform to the cultural norms of the new society. But at the same time, really doing this, it is easy to feel oneself as not important at all. In the case of the refugees, the feeling of invisibility overlaps to the real invisibility. The psychological vulnerability due to the lack of the documents overlaps to the vulnerability of the inner side in most of the cases. In this situation, it seems necessary not only to hypothesize some practices like therapies could be to encounter directly people, but to reflect on which situation could promote experiences of true recognition of oneself and his own identity. The increasing social violence against the so-called strangers in our society affects seriously these efforts. In front of this deep feeling of being invisible, who migrates can constantly regret what he has lost. The nostalgia, the more known sentimental picture about migration, can seem incurable, a type of psychic pain. Everything can be picked in an atmosphere of yearning desire, perfect and without stain can seem the culture of origin, happy the songs of support, always the widened family. When you are in your house, the drops from the ceiling drip plain. If you change house, the water passes strong and it ends up overwhelming you. This is what said a Syrian refugee in therapy, quoting an Arabic proverb. Or you can make all to enter and quickly take part of the society in which you have arrived. The enigma of the arrival is more difficult still to analyze of the one of the departure. It seems to me that the crucial question is, for the psychological health of refugees, how to get out from the invisibility, and for the society, how to facilitate this trial, creating proximity. At the arrival in a different society, a lot of things change: the consensual codes, the meaning of the symbols and the language, the rhythm of the job, the perception of the anthropological and social space. So there is the risk to suffer a deep wound. If the trial is not facilitated, people create some more radical defenses, because they lose the land of personal loyalties, familiar loyalties, and in the end also cultural loyalties. It is interesting to operate on the psychological health, exploring the depth of the process of change of the identity that transforms a person along a forced migration. The thing that I have heard more often, beside the disappointment of the betrayed expectations, is talking about the gap between what it was imagined and what it was found. Sometimes you meet people that have taken long and dangerous trips and crossed different borders, who are shocked by the encounter with a society strongly built on the personal power of an individual. Sometimes, whereas at the center of the world there was the society that was left, now there is the individual who risks the isolation. And Italy seemed, perhaps, to people who arrived there, a country where the collective structure, like family or certain forms of collective sympathetic solidarity, are still strong. But to the refugee is asked to be able in a short time to project him in a practical independence. And this also can create fragility. Especially in a society like ours, where the lack of work risks to leave the person for a long time without doing nothing. So the migrant, I would say, risks to leave on his skin a sort of inner conflict, and can be difficult for him to feel that the experience of the migration is in evolution. But if the experience of the exile continues for a long time, whereas it was a strength because it allowed the person to have new possibilities, it can become arid and can become a paradigm of fixity. This wound can produce deep feelings of impossibility to connect the here and now with the before and there. This is all the, let's say, psychological work with refugees, I think, and maybe we could say that this is already so difficult, but it becomes much more difficult in a situation like the actual political situation in Italy since the last election. Okay, this was a first frame of this type of work as we live it now in Italy. Okay. Thank you very much.
Maybe a question. Can I ask questions now? You mentioned that when that's one of the questions I used to have when you have someone migrant moving, for example, to France. I have heard about these places called the L'Agence de Calais, or places like this where migrants are. So normally they are not alone, because they live in community. You have the community of Afghans, community of Algerians, the community So I'm not sure, I don't know if you worked on that, in this kind of cases where you have the superposition of different communities, which are not always interacting in a friendly way, by the way.
Yes.
So, so the feeling of loneliness is probably not huge, no? So, what do you think about the fact that living in this kind of places within a community would alleviate the pain of being far from home?
It's difficult to say, from my opinion, because I think that having communities could help to elaborate some feelings of the migration. But on the other hand, there are interesting studies on the fact that there is a kind of fake elaboration of the migration within the community that are forcibly staying together. Secondly, in our city, in Torino, we are not really connected to this situation, but we have an experience of something called ex-Olympic village, because we had Olimpiadi. And after some years, when all the villages built for the Olimpiadi were occupied by refugees. So it's like a quarter of 1,000 people occupying...
illegally, not legally.
Yeah, of course, occupying illegally. And there was a study on that situation trying to demonstrate that what alleviates the feeling of refugees in that situation was a kind of recognition of a possibility of a political fight inside that situation. So we can be together, we can share the same, in a sense, no? But I think that it's not so obvious. I think that it depends from... and it's not so, maybe it's not so directly obvious. Yes, it's not an immediate consequence. But of course, just to finish, of course, I think that you point to one of the essential points. Let's say that in our society, we don't have many public spaces where we can treat this kind of elaboration. And probably the migration is not, it's not a fact of an individual, it's a fact of groups of individuals. So what I think is that it's necessary a reflection on how there could be public spaces where to talk, at least, no? And try to share with others and live with others dynamics that are not only individual.
It's not a solution, but it can help.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was interested to learn a little bit more about your specific work on psychotherapy. Have you been really working in these centers and were you able to collect specific data and accompany the refugees?
Actually, my job in general is coordinated by associations that organize the reception for refugees in apartments. Mm-hmm. So what with the main association I work with, I could have my studio. They organize a place in the association where I can date refugees, and they give me the possibility to work always with an intercultural mediator for the translation and for the process of therapy. Of course, the setting is not so precise. It's very much more elastic than the setting that I can use in other places where I work. But it is possible where you find associations that have in mind that this is an important need. Otherwise, not everyone has the idea that the mediator has to follow the therapy all the time. No, they think a lot of associations think that the mediator is just a helper. So one day you can work with a mediator, another day you can work with other mediators. So there is a big process for me. This I learned with time of talking with the associations about my work and talking with the refugees about my work, because I have a bit of time at the beginning that can last 1 month, 2 months, in which I try to explain him or her what is my job. And we try to understand each other on that field.
So, how these cases get referred to you? So, is this on the basis of self-reporting? I'm facing serious traumatic stress. How you identify your cases and how you then accompany them? Because, I mean, the assumptions on dark numbers are that between 60 and 75% of migrants, be it asylum seekers or refugees, all face psycho-traumatic stress. So which cases do you intervene on the basis of a clear statement, I would like to have been taken care of, or on the basis of a referral from a doctor or those who are making trouble? How does this work?
Okay. There's always a first phase in which I work with the worker of the asylum system, because I find that a lot of time they tell you some problems of the refugee because they have problem with the refugee. So this is the first, let's say, the first point of work. Who has the problem? Who want to face the problem with the psychotherapy? In the case that there is the intention of the refugee recognize also. I'm kind of aware that my work, as I told, can be very long in the time. I can work for maximum 2 years. Sometimes I follow the refugees to the interview of the territorial commission. So let's say when I see that there is a case in which we can work on a psychological problem to help the person telling better his story. In an interview to have an asylum system, this is one of the type of work I can do. The other type is connected with the network of public services. So if the case is severe, like post-traumatic stress disorders, I never work alone. I work always with the psychiatric or the health service, and I accompany for that period because we have another problem that in the psychiatric services they don't have mediators, so they are not able to interview really the person. So it's a kind of a connection work to other services.
Can you say more?
Derrière.
Yeah, I wondered if you could clarify the type of, maybe one example, I'm sure you do a lot of different things, but a kind of therapy that you would provide.
To me. To Thomas.
Yeah. So just, I don't know if you could give a case example. Just describe typically what you would do. How would a case go through? What type of service and therapy would you provide the patient in this case?
So if I understand that was a question of Jeanette. It's important to understand the concrete steps. There will be potentially the guys who need potentially help are identified by the workers of the place.
Firstly.
That they contact you.
Yeah.
And then you have to put a name maybe of the problem. And then comes the question of...
Which comes from a space of total ignorance. Because I'm a sociologist.
Of course.
Professionally,
of course.
Listening to you.
No, I can give you the example of a therapy that I followed, but not all not all the therapy are like that.
Yeah,
I had the opportunity to work on the case of a person coming from Kashmir. He was a fighter in his country, and he left the country. He was tortured in Kashmir for some days, but in the end he could escape. And he started a long trip to Italy through Libya. In Libya he was again tortured. So in this case, for example, from the first talking to me of the workers, I arrived to know the person. The person accepted a treatment. This treatment lasted for 2 years. And it was always a work to give somehow words, little by little, to what had happened to him. We accompanied him to the interview in the Territorial Commission. I decided to go with him at the interview as a kind of testimony. Testimony of the process of the therapy. And in the end, he obtained a humanitarian status, and he decided to contact again his political party and leave. In this case, he left for Malta. So let's say that this kind of therapy, he take care also to some connection with right dimension, with the right dimension for the person. And we try to see the therapy as a process of testimony of something that can be also a force. Okay, you understand?
Yeah, I understand.
More or less, I'm getting lost in.
What about the language during the therapy? Do you have some translators, or what is the language you use?
Yeah, I always speak in Italian. I come from this training in Ethnopsychiatry, always working with mediators, where the mediators translate, but also help me to understand what can be not translated, especially what can be not translated. So what I do is to speak in Italian and ask the mediator to translate and mediate with the person. Sometimes they understand something that I don't understand at all.
Mediators.
Yes, they also, the mediator and the patient share something that I can't dominate at all. So the work with mediators in time become a sort of trying to use these for the therapy.
Do you know Simone? She's a sociologist, and she's also a mediator, and she published a book of this kind of experience when the Chinese passion for doing mental therapy asked her not to translate. This is really interesting to understand that what you can have such as information is not really what probably the patient want to say or would like to say.
Yeah.
And how can you go through this gap?
It's a very big question, but in few words, I would say that I never used that setting of therapy in a direct way. So I never asked to the mediator, please translate what I'm saying in Italian. I'm always asking him, what do you say in your language when you talk about what we are talking in Italian? So it's the idea to create a kind of circularity in the therapeutic group that is not going in with the idea of that there is an alliance between me and you. No, there is an alliance between me therapist and you patient, or between me and you mediator. No, but we have to construct little by little an alliance in the group. It would be very interesting to explore more, because that's what I was meaning, naming the problem of alliances between mediator and patient. A lot of times happened to me that the patient enter in the room and just go to the mediator, and I'm the invisible there, no? So I have to learn how to be hosted by that situation, because I think that they live some alliance that can be also unconscious, so it doesn't respect what these people want really to share. So doing little by little work on these things help us to share more like fears of the patient to us, or there is the patient that comes it happened to me, this patient in particular. We went the first time at the Territorial Commission, and they had a translator, Pakistani, and he was coming from Kashmir, who is in fight with Pakistan, and he refused to be interviewed. So we had a second chance months after. So there is also the patient that comes and say, no, me with you, I will never talk. So it's a kind of construction of the relation that can be.
The question?
Yeah. So I was just wondering how you recruit the mediator, or which kind of requirement they have, if they have an education in psychology, or they're just people who happen to know the language.
Let's say that the ideal mediator for this type of treatment is a mediator that have a long story of mediation, linguistically, first of all, but also a big knowledge of a system of healing in the two culture, in the Italian culture, both in his original culture. So I like very much working with people with whom I worked since 10 years ago, for example. No? There is in Torino an observatory on immigration that is trying to do a platform of communication between all the mediators. It's a kind of database where you can find the name of all the mediators and their...
They are paid by you, mediators?
Paid, in the case of this type of therapy, like me, they are paid by the national reception system. The more you know the mediator, the more easily you can work in this type of work. And we start to have also mediator maybe that have a graduation on psychology, so they put together different types of competencies.
Okay, I have just two short questions related to this kind of topics, very short. The first one is about whether there is an inflection in the policy, things you can observe in your work after the political change in Italy. For example, maybe people are contacted less to help, or maybe when you come to help to go to this court, to this territorial stuff, the probability to have a positive answer decreases, something like this. The second thing is about this intercultural things. And then, I don't know, it's not very clear to me how, because you are clearly working under a symmetry of information. And I don't know whether with the experience you are able to identify cheating or things like this on both sides, on the two sides. I mean, the side of the mediator. I'm not shedding doubts on this, but you see, you have a lot of asymmetry of information. Do you control for this, or you just go for your?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. We assume that we are not working on the true story, but we are working on what we have done there to help people to be conscious, let's say, of themselves. So it's a kind of axiom we start for.
Ignorance.
Yeah. It's something also different. It was something very deepened by this model of the ethnopsychiatric, because in a multicultural, it's a problem that we have in general in a multicultural asset.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes. And concerning the first question, I would say that what I see is that people are very, very worried right now about racism in Italy. So we always had a big problem about using the services by the migrants. The literature say that the use of the services of the migrants is always lower than the others. But what the people say is that the fear of being persecuted for their skin color, for example. This is
But you
some,
don't see any change in your job? Nothing changes? Since the arrival of Salvini and Di Maio?
I think that this changed from
Yeah, but
Salvini
that's
on.
the general atmosphere, but not in your particular work.
Well, people tell it also inside. You mean if the motive is to come for that?
Well, whether the frequency of your consultancy decreases, whether the rate
Decreases
of approval
rather than increase. Decrease
Decreases.
rather
Yeah,
than
that's
increase.
what I'm saying.
Yes,
the rate of approval in the territorial court decreases. That's what I mean. You
decrease.
can, if you have data, if you can document this with data, would be better.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so I'm going to enforce my power as chair.
Enforce it, amigo. I'm sorry. No, but the topic is the first time I need a psychotherapist. I need it myself.
You need it. You need it.
In the interest of having, at the end, kind of a joint conversation, we're assuming that there's some overlap between the two presentations. So, thank you, Silvia.